Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Game Changers podcast. I am your host, Barion McQueen, and I have a special guest who wears many hats. So this conversation can go a couple different directions. Ginni Saraswati. Perfect. I killed it. How are you?
I'm well, Barry. Thank you. I just put my okay sign up with you. I'm like, he killed it.
Good.
He got the first and the surname right. I'm just 10 points, buddy. 10 points.
Good. We already doing well.
Yeah.
So, like I said, we can go so many different directions, but give me a little background on you and your company.
Sure. So, Barion, I am the founder and CEO of Ginni Media, a podcast production agency based out of here in New York City. Obviously not from there originally from Sri Lanka, then raised in Australia. Wow. So I have a team of 27 freelancers all around the world. We work across 16 different time zones, but we all manage to be creative and get along quite well. So that for me is one of my biggest achievements that I can take with me when I choose to exit this planet, whenever that will be. So it's a true honor every day that we get to create, we get to live life intentionally, and obviously anybody who is a freelancer will know too, the really cool thing is you get to wake up, create, and be very intentional about who you work with. So we're all about bringing that to the present every day.
So how do you get into that space?
Purely by accident.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, as a consequence, obviously, as a consequence of being a radio host, I ended up here. I feel that I've always been entrepreneurial in the sense that, Barry, and I've never really felt 9 to 5 worked for me personally. I found it to be very restrictive. I found it to be very hierarchical. I also found it to be broken in the sense that it didn't really account for time that employees, quote unquote employees, were spending on work. And it also didn't really allow work-life balance. I think 9 to 5 served a purpose and still does serve a purpose for certain professions. But for me, the whole idea of being stuck in traffic for an hour, being pissed off on the way to work, being stuck in traffic for an hour on the way home, being pissed off on the way home, when are you ever actually happy? Or when are you ever actually present, right? Because you're already starting your day off annoyed and in a rush because you got to drop your kid to school, you got to make breakfast, you got to, get ready for the day, go to the gym, and then you're at work, and then, you've got all these things that you've got to do. And then on the way home, you want to get home for dinner and you got to make dinner. And it's like, how do you
get up and do it all over again, right?
Exactly. And this is where, and then the weekend comes and you're also annoyed because Saturday's your day to be like, oh, it's my weekend. And Sunday, you're annoyed it's Sunday because tomorrow you got to go back to work.
That's a fact.
We're in this constant perpetual state where we're looking forward to going on vacation or looking forward to when we'll be relieved of this. So how are we ever actually being present? And I think now the workforce has, with everything that we've gone through over the last 3 years, we've had to really look at different ways of working because what is a quality of life if we're always not in the present and we're looking forward to something else that may or may not come?
That's amazing. This was me. I was in this corporate world.
Yeah.
I always felt like I had something better. And I think I had dedicated so much time to growing other people's companies while being within the company, but then getting to that glass ceiling where it's like, you can't make no more money. This is it. So I'm like, so for the rest of my life, am I stuck at this plateau of, okay, that's it. Yeah. So it's like, I can work harder, but it's not going to equate to more money, or I could work less and it don't equate to no more. So I always knew I was not meant to be in that structure.
Yeah.
I was just, I didn't know I was so scared to just remove that safety net. I think that it was just like, I was okay with just doing my stuff on the side, but not 100% because I had the stability of a paycheck. So it was just like, I didn't have to go hard in my side hustle. I just had to do enough to have a little extra to play around with, but never really quit. And 2019, I was like, I'm out of here. Look, you telling me all I can make is 60 grand a year? This is a joke. to me. Like, I know what this company makes, right? Millions, 12, 13 million a year. And I was just like, no, I'm going to start my marketing agency. I've been doing it on the side. And I started to realize just working on my business after work and on the weekend, I was making more than the 60, 70 hours I was putting in at this company. And I was like, you know what? I'm out. So I quit, and then boom, COVID hits.
Oh, man.
COVID hits. And I'm
Man.
like, oh, I just got married. How do I explain to my wife? I left my job to start this marketing agency, and all of my clients were small business owners. We was just doing SEO and writing blogs and copywriting and all of these things. And they just like, look, Baron, we might not even be open, let alone pay the marketing company. So like, and I'm just like, I had to pivot. And it just like, I opened up this real estate photography company in the middle of COVID, and it just blew up during COVID.
That's amazing.
The real estate.
Yeah.
So I got to talk to you. How do you manage people in different time zones? And I can't manage the people down the street from me.
Well, this is firstly, I gotta say, hats off to you, Barion, for being truly entrepreneurial in the fact that you're like, I'm here and I've got to pivot. What can I do? Real estate photography, and look what was birthed from that place of, oh gosh, I've got to plan my next move here. And what I also really enjoyed about your story was that the fact that, you were working, you put in the work, and, you put in the work after your day job, and you put in the work on the weekend. You're like, okay, this is I'm making more than what I do in my day job with less time. And the factor there was, let me ask you a question now. How happy were you because for me, like, before you answer, I'd love to share. For me, when I was making my first, say, 50 grand on my own, my day job that I left paid me more than that. But I was happy because I made all of that on my own. And then it just grew from there. Like, how did you feel?
I looked at that like I was making the same amount of money, working less time. So it's just like, if I dedicate the hours that I put into this company, into my thing, I should be making way more money, right? Yeah. So the way I look at the hourly structure now is completely different. 100%. Because I've had days where I'm like, if I go into a house and I shoot a house, I'm only in the house 30 minutes, but I made $500. To me, before I left my job, I knew the number I needed to hit was $190 a day to match what I was making at the company. And I'm just like, $190, I can do, that's nothing. Yeah. So now a $25 an hour job don't sound good to me no more. Like $100 doesn't sound good an hour. So I think now that I've been in it, this is 2 years now already gone. I couldn't imagine going back into that hamster wheel thing of
trading
like,
time for money.
I can't. So it's just like, I'm the happiest I've ever been. My wife's like, how can you be so happy and you don't know what you're gonna make next month? I don't care. Like, I have good months, I have great days, but I don't have to call nobody off and tell them, hey, I want to go to the beach today. I'm feeling sick. I got to put my sick voice on, right? Like, oh man, it must be COVID. I might need the next 7 days off, right? I don't have to do none of that, right? It's just like, I'm not working today. I'm going to go to the beach. And that flexibility is priceless. 100%. If I made less money, that flexibility is priceless.
100%.
So all those gray hairs that I had have slowly disappeared since I left, and it's priceless. So I'm happy, the happiest I've probably ever been in a long time. So
that spaciousness that you talked about really is priceless. And the hamster wheel that you talk about, and this is why I think in certain circumstances, not all, but in certain circumstances, the 9-to-5 model doesn't work. And I say this because what you're actually getting paid for in your salary, if you break it down to an hourly rate, sometimes it's like, oh, I'm getting like $14 an hour. I know in some professions, like the amount of take-home work and the amount of like overtime that they do that's unpaid, it's like you're not actually getting paid for 9 to 5. You're getting paid for like 7 to 10 p.m.
And that was me. Once you get a salary, it's like, you can work extra, but you don't make extra. That's it. So it was just like, so I never, so like now that I'm running a company and I'm having employees, how do you keep
Yeah.
the company morale up? What do you gotta do? You gotta
Yeah,
do
well,
a retreat with the employees? Like, yo, we're gonna meet in Bali next month. To just
well, this is the thing, Barry. And when I started Ginni Media, what I found was that working remotely worked for me because, to your point, you're 100% only accountable to one person. So that's you. And if you know you've got bills to pay or rent to pay, and this is how I started my business, I'm like, all right, my biggest package that I'm going to put out to clients is the amount of rent I have to pay. So at that time in my life, when I moved to New York, it was $1,400 a month of rent that I had to pay. So I'm like, that's going to be my biggest package because I know that's my biggest expense at this point in time, right? And then I started to think, okay, how can I scale me? And then I started bringing on certain people to do the roles that I was doing, but not quite good at. Like when I started Ginni Media, I was doing all the audio editing, the show note writing, some of the graphic design, but it took me like 4 hours to do one little animation. I'm like, gosh, like that's like full on startup hustle days, right? Where you're trying to figure everything out, watching YouTube tutorials and you're trying to figure it out. So I hired a graphic designer who then took that off my plate, and I gave that graphic designer an hourly rate to be like, hey, this is the work. And then as I continued to scale me or scale the tasks that weren't what I was the best at doing, because the best part of my job is the relationship building part. That's the part I love. And that's the part I feel is my greatest strength. I'm not very good at a lot of things, but relationship building, making friends, connection, community, like that's my jam. Like we can talk for like hours and, you know, we could have a coffee or whatnot, we'll be good. But I'm like, I got to focus there. That's where my zone is. So once I start building a team, I'm like, okay, this team's getting bigger. We're on like 3 different time zones. How do we get this to work? And because I was working with freelancers, they weren't used to that environment of, hey, let's all have a meeting together, right? That it just wasn't really a thing because they're like, yo, I just speak to you and you pay me and I do your work and that's it.
Yeah.
As the company started growing, there was a need for like a touch point, right? Like these people speak to each other almost every day, but they don't know what you look like. They don't know what you sound like and that sort of thing. So I started introducing, this was pre-pandemic, by the way, 2019. I started introducing weekly meetings, like just that touch point where we could talk, go through what's happening in the company. They could see me, we could chill, we could hang. And then like, that's when like the company morale started to build because people were like, oh, that's what he looks like. That's what he sounds like. And then I got people to co-host meetings with me. Like, okay, tell us about yourself. And it's literally like showing up and be like, hey, if we were in the office, like I would know how Laura sounds like. I would know how she takes her coffee. I would know like what she wears to work. Like you take those things for granted when you're in a physical environment, but when you're completely virtual, you don't know certain things about people. You don't know where they work from. You don't know what's going on in their country. So once we started to see little nuances with people and little quirks and little in jokes that they had, I'm like, okay, community is starting to build. And you'll find that in any organization, virtual or in person, community is a huge part of the human experience at work. Like really, going for a drink with your coworkers or going to lunch with your coworkers, like when that physical element is taken out, you've got to find another way to connect people together and connect to what they're building and creating together, right? So it's a constant refinement process that I find, especially during the pandemic where everybody was jumping on Zoom and working from home. We were all like, okay, so business as usual then. But then the aftermath of this, where we're at now, is a lot of people are zoomed out. They're like, I don't want to jump on another virtual meeting. So you've got to hold space for that in some way. So I've made an announcement at my company, like we don't need to have a weekly team meeting unless we really need to. Like I'm not going to invite people to be there and stare at each other, like for the sake of it, right? So it's about fostering that community within your team, no matter what time zone they're at, and also encouraging them to have like internal meetings. So my department heads, I encourage them to have, hey, just check in with your teammates, even if it be something based on, hey, check out this new software in audio or check out this new design tool that we can use. And the other part is the clarity that builds speed, right? Organizations that have the most successful trajectories, they don't spend time worrying about the BS of politics of what's going on in the organization, right? And that always comes from the top. If the top person is clear and very decisive and is accountable and is honest and upfront and does their best to match their actions to their words, people aren't going to necessarily be like, oh, well, Ginni said this, but she meant that. And that whole mind game is just like, it takes a lot of time and energy. So as clear as you can be about, hey, I expect you to do this by this time. Yeah. And then the room for like the space for negotiation on that, or like, I need more time for this. That is like the whole game of any organization, whether you're remote or in person, right? Because some bosses don't know that. And, you know, there's 27 people in my company. I'm not across every single thing that they do, but if I know, okay, where is this? I'll go to our project management software and be like, okay, we're here. Like, I'm clear. Yeah. And if it's not done, then I check in with the department. I'm like, what's going on with this? They're like, oh, this person did. It's just clarity, and clarity breeds speed, and it breeds great creativity and great work in that way.
I agree. I think the thing that I learned working for other people is how, I would say, removed or unaware that the actual owner's relationship with the employees are.
Yeah.
So me knowing that, so when I first started my marketing agency, there was one day of the week that I used to let my employees pick where we were going to work from, right? So we're here in South Florida, right? So you can pick any beach, you can pick any rooftop spot overlooking the ocean, whatever. I'm like, look, one day out of the week. That's how I started the remote thing before a pandemic, because I just didn't like the environment of the office and the cubicle and I don't know, I hated it as an employee. So I was like, I can't talk about everything I hated about working for somebody. And now I got my employees doing the same thing, right? So we used to do this. You pick where we want to work from. And they like, I want to work from the bowling alley. I'm like, how are we going to get some work done at the bowling alley? They like, oh, we can work. We can make it work. So we've been to the bowling alley, and we've been lunch top spots on the boardwalk. And it was, but everybody, I made everybody feel like the company was theirs and it wasn't mine. So everybody wanted to see it grow, because I think me working for those other companies made me a better boss, I think.
100%. 100%. I can relate to that totally too, because I think I've had a couple of bosses that showed me exactly what not to do with my team, right? They wrote the manual on that, like, don't micromanage, don't like have a meeting every time someone sneezes. Like, why are we sitting here talk? And literally I would have meetings with a certain the last corporate job I had, we'd have 8:30 weekly meetings. 8:30 daily meetings, right? And literally it was the supervisor going around the whole team asking us everything that we had to do that day. That's micromanagement. That's not strategy. And they're like, this is strategy. I'm like, what are we strategizing?
Like, why don't you just spend the money on a good CRM and you don't have to ask us what we're doing every day, right?
And back then, I don't think there were many CRMs around, but like, but again, like, I have empathy for my supervisor, because his supervisor also micromanaged. And then his supervisor, so it's coming down the chain, right? If there was clarity of, hey, we're burning this amount of money and we need to really refine processes, like, there's got to be a better way than what they were doing, right? But because that's the only way they knew how to manage, they just kept doing it. Like, let's just keep micromanaging and burning more money, right?
At what point did you know, like, so when you get into this space, at what point did you know it was time to hire other people?
The point that I knew, when I was working 12, 14, 16, sometimes 18 hours a day, I'm like, okay. And I moved to New York. I was in love at the time. I moved to New York because I fell in love with the city, and then I fell in love with New York. I'm like, hey, I moved here because I loved two things in New York. One was my partner at the time, and one was the city, which I still love. And I thought, hey, like, I need a little bit more balance. Like, I need to start taking care of myself. Like, I was finding I was getting headaches every month because I was just on the screen a lot. So I'm like, okay, you're maxed out at your capacity and you're not performing at your best. So again, like, that's a point where I'm new. Okay, I need to start hiring things out. And that's when I started. I'm like, all right, designer. And we built a process for design team. Then audio editor, built the process for audio editing. Copy, built the process for copywriting and the various aspects we have of that. So it's still an evolution. Like, as the company grows, as content demand grows, as podcasting shifts and changes, like, we've got to adapt our talent, but we have a foundational element of what allows us to do what we really love, is to have that freedom that we all crave. Like, we want that freedom to design our day. So as long as there's very clear foundational elements in place, that's what that's what we built. That's what I built the company on. That's what I knew. Okay, that's the point I need to start outsourcing. And even to my department heads, I say, okay, are we good for resources? They're like, yeah, we're good. This person wants to do more hours. Let's give them more work, or we hire out. We've already got processes all set up for that.
That's dope. Yeah, because I like, so when I started my marketing company, all I did in the beginning was logos. Yeah. All we did was design logos. And then it went from, and I was doing the work. So I'm like, man, like, I got to deal. This customer wants 3-4 revisions. And now I got new customers. I got to catch up. I'm just like, I got to hire somebody. I had to focus on dollar productive activities, let's say, right? I couldn't be doing, because at that point, I'm just working for the money, right? Yeah. Like you said, sacrificing the time for the money. So it was just like, we did logos. And I'm like, okay, so we doing good with logos. We've done like thousands of logos. And then they like, we love the logo. Do you do websites? And I'm like, yeah, I could do websites. So I'm like, I'm on Fiverr, like website guy. Like, I gotta find a website guy, right? So I'm like, I'm selling websites for like $2,000, and the guy on Fiverr is charging me like $100. I'm just like, oh, this is the middleman. I'm just the middleman. This is perfect, right? Yeah. So then they're like, oh, do you do SEO? So as I was growing this company, I personally was learning every role. But when I started the Brand Castle, I never wanted to be a marketing agency. I just wanted to be a branding agency. So we just wanted to create content, maybe logos, maybe websites, but a lot of photo and video on social media. Like and it turned into a marketing agency. And I was just like, I'm not happy doing this. So like, even now as we speak, now that people are back spending money, the company's kind of like starting to build back up again, but I'm completely rebranding that. We don't want to do SEO. We don't want to do copy. We don't want to write your blog. We don't want to do any of those things. Your logo, your website, and create the content. That's it. Yeah. And it's like, it's been such a weight lifted off my shoulders because the marketing aspect is so bad that by the time a client gets to us, I felt like they're like in desperate mode, right? So they call us and like, hey, we're not happy with our marketing company. The phone's not ringing. We want to bring you on. And then you sign up with them, and you signed up with them on Monday, and then Tuesday, like, the phone's not ringing. What's going on? Like, what are you guys doing? And I'm like, oh, I didn't sign up for this. I just be the creative. Like, we don't want to worry about how many phone calls you're getting in a day and pre-qualifying the leads. And it just like, I'm like, I can't do this. Yeah. And then the podcast thing, I felt like I always had a lot of information to share from growing different companies. And a lot of people wanted to bring me on as a marketer to their podcast. So I felt like they was using me because they knew I could market. They didn't really care about me being the host. They like, if we let him host, he's gonna market it right? So I always turned everybody down because I'm like, as a marketer, to be transparent, I can't market a podcast because I know nothing about the world. I know nothing about the podcast industry. I don't even know how to launch one, what platforms to put it on until I do it first. And that's how I actually got into podcasting. I was like, I'm going to do this first before I practice on somebody else's stuff and tell them that I could market it. But I knew I had good relationships, but I really wanted to shed light on people that was doing some great things that otherwise maybe not have heard about. So I'm like, it's a common thread that I always have with the guests, no matter what industry they're in, that it's just like I'm talking to actresses, and their journey is still similar to entrepreneurship. You know what I mean? Musicians, same thing. So, but I like this podcast. I meet great people. There's no pressure. Yeah. It's fun. How do you get into this? Because you kind of like helping launch other people's podcasts, right? Like that network. Talk about that.
Yeah. So what we help launch. So I have 3 businesses. So Ginni Media is, I guess, the production side of things, where we do everything from online recording, and then we do post-production and then content creation from the podcast from there. It's my first business. And the second one is Metro Podcast Studio, which is a podcast recording studio I co-own out of the city. Oh, nice. And then the third one is Podcast Accelerator, which is the only done for you group launch podcast program in the world. So we've launched 128 podcasters who run through the program alone. And Ginni Media have produced well over, I think we're into like the high 400s amount of podcasts we've produced. So we've been around the block a bit. However, like these sorts of I fell into podcasting as a consequence of being a radio host and a podcaster myself. And it was, I guess, doubling down on the need that's needed for podcasters. We need people to edit audio. We need people to conceptualize topics and content. We need people to create artwork, and the talent needs to just be the talent, and everything else just needs to be taken care of. And everybody who's adopted that mentality of, listen, I'm here to create, you guys take care of everything. This is my lane. This is yours. Every one of my clients who has adopted that mentality has had a successful podcast. And I don't think that mentality is just restrictive to podcasts. I think that mentality is for everything. Like, this is my lane. I'm going to invest in what's not my lane and what's better, what other people can do better. It's just going to propel you to success over time. It's inevitable.
That's the person that wears many hats and the master of none, right? So I agree with that. Like, so when I got into this podcast space, I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? You know, when I really first started, I took a bunch of audio from my YouTube channel because I used to just do like little branding tips and tricks. Yeah. And so my first couple episodes were literally rips, audios from my YouTube. And then I'm like, okay. And then people's like, people been waiting for you to do a podcast. Can I be a guest? And, and I'm just like, okay. So shout out to my team, Gene and Amber and all my graphics people. I can't do it without y'all. I'm just this guy talking to people, but they make it work behind the scenes. And I think I understood that early on, just from business. Not even, I just looked at this podcast like it was business. Like, look, let me be the owner and let my graphic person do this and let my people at the studio get the audio right. And let me let Gene do his stuff on the camera and make when it's a Zoom interview, the little background with the I would never be able to launch an episode every week if I had to do all of that stuff. 100%. So I'm 100% grateful for people who actually seen kind of what I'm doing and was just like, how can I be a part of it? And like you said, just staying in your lane, because like, so when people come to you, I'm assuming it's like, hey, they want to start a podcast, but they don't know where to start, right?
100%. So typically,
talk to me about that process.
So typically people who come to me directly to Ginni Media are like, hey, I want to start a podcast. And our business has been built purely from word of mouth. I have not taken out a single dollar on digital advertising. I'm a big believer in, and I'm a little bit old school, even though I'm running this kind of new media agency. I'm old school in the fact that I 300% believe in exceptional customer service. Now, I say that because I feel that, again, being the person whose lane it is, building relationships and building community and fostering that even within my organization, that I feel that there is a difference between a transactional agreement with your clients, which sometimes it does serve a purpose to do that. And I believe in, okay, yep, these clients are cool. I love working with them, and that's all cool too. Like, we work for a project and then we come in and out. But then the ongoing client, the raving fan client, you can potentially, if you double down on value and exceptional customer service, it's a difference between a client who thinks you're okay to a client whose wallet you win for life and who advocates you for other people's wallets to win for life. Right? That takes out all of my marketing budget if I'm just a nice person every day, right? And if I train my team to have those qualities of empathy, kindness, customer service, all those sorts of things, it does effectively, it's a positive ROI. And that part, I know Gary Vee talks about it in his 12 and a half book, and I wholeheartedly believe that sort of training in business is missing. Like, when you go to business school, they teach you about, okay, hard sales, and you're going to push it. And you're in this art of convincing. I don't need to convince you to work with me. If you want to work with me, great. If not, namaste, go do you. Find someone who aligns with you. No animosity from my end. But I think when it comes to, building a business and building, I forgot your question, but I'm going on this rant. So
no, I was talking about how people find you, but you're still on there.
So people typically, when they come to me, it's because someone said, hey, you produce this person's podcast, they highly recommended you. And then, again, like I may not work with that person again, but they still remember that experience with me that they're recommending me. So that firstly is the highest form of flattery. So when people come to me saying, I trust you with my podcast, I trust you to launch it, it's the best thing. And, that for me is the highest compliment. And I think it's the best way to grow your business organically, the word of mouth. And now with social media, we have word of mouth at scale, but you get a personal recommendation on top of that, you're good. Like, you will get referrals quite organically.
How do you have the foresight to know where this podcast thing was headed? Like to even be a thing? Like I would never thought I'd be a podcast host, right? How do you foresee that?
This is the thing. When I started my podcast, Barion, it was, again, as a consequence of being a radio host. But as a radio host, I noticed something in the audience patterns of how they'd consume our breakfast show, right? When you have a morning show and typical FM radio stations, or even, if you listen to the radio in the morning, circa 2002 or circa 2007, I should say, when you're listening to the radio, it's like, okay, you're commuting somewhere, right? And in that commute, you receive news, traffic, weather, biggest headlines, maybe a celebrity interviewed, here and there, right? I noticed as soon as Apple released the iPod and as soon as podcasts were being made, I noticed that the FM station antenna geographical restriction that radios put in just opened up to the whole world. And people are like, what do you mean, Ginni? I'm like, well, they had streaming. You could stream radio stations from Melbourne, Australia. I could stream Proud FM in Canada. And that to me was insane. They're like, yeah, but that just means you can listen to another radio station. Why would you want to do that? I'm like, you're able to now open up this whole web of content. And then what podcasting brought on was, say, for example, Barion, if I interviewed P. Diddy, right, on my station. P. Diddy, P. Diddy fans don't exist in Melbourne alone. P. Diddy fans are all around the world.
Right.
But to listen to P. Diddy before podcasting, they would have to tune in around 4:30 p.m. their time, probably sneak into their cubicle or their lunchroom just to listen to the streaming interview. They would have to do that. But now that there's podcasts, my station would take that interview with Diddy, pop it on iTunes. It was available the next day. People could consume it in their own time. So we're opening up all these audiences worldwide. So I knew, okay, on-demand TV was a thing. Podcasting started off as on-demand radio. And now it's broken out into all these different, you can find a podcast about stuff, about Smurfs, about the Office TV show. Like it's just broken out into this whole conglomerate of topics. So I see that we pretty much, radio was the ancestor to podcasting, still is, but it's followed the same trajectory as what people do with TV. And the power of audio and podcasting is that it gives the person on the other end consuming the audio full autonomy. Like they can listen to something while doing something else. You can't watch TV and do that. You can't read and do that. Like the essence of putting in as much as you can into your day while consuming and learning, you can only get that through audio media. So that's kind of how I saw it going the way that it did.
So let me ask you, radio or podcast? You have to pick.
Podcasts. I have a soft spot for radio, but I love podcasts.
How did you get into radio?
Purely, again, by accident. My whole life has just been a series of accidents and, I'm an entrepreneur in New York. Okay, I'll do this. So I was in Melbourne. I was finishing up my college degree in film, TV, and theater. And the only thing that was missing for me was radio. So I saw these ads go out online for this a radio station called Joy 94.9 in Melbourne. They had an ad for Certificate 3 in radio broadcasting, which they were selecting, X amount of people to do. So I put my hand up, threw in the interview, and then I said, hey, I'll do it. And then I got selected. I'm like, okay, great. And then I'm like, I'm not sure about radio. I just put my hand up for it. And then my program manager's like, hey, you got to go and do this show for me. Like, just do the graveyard shift. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'll do anything. Give me admin. I'll do cleaner, anything. Like, no, I think you got a bit of personality there. We need to get you behind the mic. So I scripted my entire show for 2 hours. I did a countdown show of the best hits that were happening that Monday night. and I did a countdown show, and the rest they say was history, Barion, because from there, like, you know, she moved me to daytime slots, to breakfast slots, to drive time. I'm like, this is pretty fun. So again, It was all consequence, but little did I know that one little application of, I'm curious about this space, led me to here. Right. So it was quite serendipitous when I think back at it.
So Ginni Media, where do you see that in the next 5 years?
Ginni Media I don't think we'll still be in podcasting. I think audio media will be our leading product. Okay. But I do see us branching out into other forms of content. Whether we do that with just audio, I think I see us moving to the other mediums. I see us being a big creative agency in terms of what content we put out, and with audio at the forefront. That's kind of what I see. But the world's been changing very quickly, Barry.
Right, like, I agree.
You know, in 3 months' time, we might be like, oh, there's this other thing out now with multi-sensory stuff. So who knows?
Yeah, I was just talking to some of the guys from the studio about when it comes to this audio, and, you know, we do a lot of like production around albums and this. Yeah. Yo, now albums have to be in Dolby Atmos, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's like a whole
other thing.
It's changing everything. And so I'm just like constantly learning. So like, what's one piece of advice you can leave with our listeners in general, just about being a leader, about running a company? What's one piece of advice you can leave with us?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I've been asked different variants of this question, but never like this way. As a leader, what to leave? I think there's this old mentality, Barry, and I don't know if you experienced this when you were working at your old day job, but the whole mentality of, oh, the boss leaves first, right? Do you remember that? I remember watching The Intern with Anne Hathaway and Robert De Niro, and he stayed right till the end with the boss, right? He's like, I don't want to leave because, you know, the boss hasn't left. I shouldn't be leaving before the boss, right? I mean, as sweet and well-intended as that was, that mentality of, oh, these employees work for you and therefore they're at your disposal to do things. I think we really need to see a shift in that mentality. I see myself as, I am a leader who works for my team, right? And if I come at it from that angle or that perspective, most of the time, if not all the time, the output or the outcome has always been ROI positive, right? You work for your team as a leader. And that's the mentality that I think a lot of leaders sometimes either forget or they just haven't been taught. Because if I'm running Ginni Media, I can't expect Joe in copy to love Ginni Media as much as I do, right? And to have that expectation sometimes can be unrealistic. If Joe does, great. I've done something right. But if Joe doesn't, if Joe's like, listen, I love the company, I love the people, I love working here. If that's all the love Joe is capable of giving, take it, yo. That's great. Joe may not love Ginni Media as much as I do. That's fine. But again, that's the mentality that I think that some leaders need to adopt, and not get so disappointed when you find out, oh, I was really hoping that talent would love the company as much as I did. It's okay. They may not, you know, unless it's Joe Media, they may not. And I understand that because I didn't love my day jobs as much as I love Ginni Media, you know?
Fact. I like that. I'm gonna ask you one more question. Have you ever had to let somebody go?
At this point, yeah, I have. I've had to let a couple of people go. I'm still learning because, you know, it's only 27 people.
Road, so that's why I'm asking.
Right.
How do you handle that?
So for me, I started off as an entrepreneur when I had to let people go. I'd circumvent that difficult conversation, right? When you do that, in just life in general, if you keep circumventing the tough conversations, right, you end up fast tracking to that very conversation. Ultimately, that's what happens, right? But when I had to let somebody go, I just had to be really clear on what was working and what wasn't. And I like, as a leader, to give my team the benefit of the doubt. So if something isn't working, rather than throwing my hands up in the air going, oh, this person doesn't know anything, or like getting frustrated, like send them some feedback. Be like, hey, I'm going to do, like, have a touch point of alignment. Like, be like, yo, this is working. This isn't. So I need improvements on this. Keep doing this. Again, clarity. It's very, very clear. and ask them to repeat back to you what they understand. And then, you know, if nothing's improved, you've got your answer. What I do is, I don't know if you do this, Barion, I gaslight myself sometimes. I see the potential in people that when the data is blaring at me saying this person is not good at analytics, why keep them on in analytics? I'm like, but maybe 2 more months they'll get it.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Right. The reason I asked that question, right? So I got put in a position, I had this conversation go viral that I don't believe in a 2-week notice, right?
Right.
So a guy came to me and he's like, hey, Baron, he was doing our SEO for our clients. So he's like, look, Baron, you know, I wanted to come to you because it's not that I don't like working here. I just don't like, I'm not passionate about SEO. He was really great at it. He's like, I'm not passionate about SEO. I want to start my own company designing apps for the phone. That's what I want to do. That's my passion.
Right.
Me being an entrepreneur, I'm never going to discourage anybody from going off and doing, like, I'm going to be your biggest champion. I'm like, bro, good for you. That's what's up. You don't owe me anything. So he's like, yeah, but I just wanted to be honest and come to you and put my 2-week notice in. I was like, no, you don't have to do that. You can leave today and start working on that app. And he's like, had this like look on his face, like, no, you know, if you wanted to bring in somebody new and I could kind of show him, no, you can leave today. I want you to start working on your app today.
Wow.
He was just like shocked. And I'm like, I don't believe in a 2-week notice. I'm not going to get what I need out of you for these next 2 weeks because you already think about the app. So go do that. And then this new person, I don't want to have to break the habits that maybe you don't follow how you originally was trained. You got your little way of finessing it or what you're comfortable with, and you're going to pass that on to the new person. So I want them to come in brand new, don't know nothing, and train them how I want. He was so hurt that I didn't give him the 2-week notice. And I'm just like,
and he didn't see the other side, the fact that you're actually giving him the permission to be like, yo, go do you and what you've always wanted to do.
He's going to learn that as an entrepreneur now about the 2-week notice. But so that's why I asked you about the firing thing. It wasn't, I guess I didn't really fire him. I just let him go earlier than he wanted to.
Yeah. Because if someone is giving you that I'm about to leave conversation, whether it be in an email or in writing or just verbally, they're already out. Like and trying to convince, and I made a mistake with my first resignation to convince them to stay. If I could do that again, given my experience, I wouldn't have done that. They're already gone. Yeah. And chances are they were thinking about that for a minute. Because typically you don't come to that abruptly. Typically, any reasonable person.
You've been prepping for that.
Yeah, you've been prepping for this. And so I think I think I appreciate the fact that you are experimenting, breaking what is status quo, because, you know, to your point, 2 weeks, that's cool. You can go today. That's fine. Today, and some people are like, but that's so mean. It's like, but they want to go. Yeah. I'm letting them go.
Why? What am I going to get out of you for the next 2 weeks? Yeah. I'm not going to get the quality that I got because you don't owe me nothing. You already checked out mentally. Like,
100%.
Go check out and do what you're going to do. Ginni, I thank you. This was a great conversation. You brought some bubbly out of me, some great energy. We definitely going to follow your journey and get all your social medias. Where can everybody find you?
They can check out our website at ginnimedia.com, or they can follow me on Instagram at The Ginni Show. I'd love to hear from you. Any questions you have on leadership, or just want to shoot the breeze, I'm here.
Yeah, perfect. Don't come to me about starting a podcast. Go to Ginni and get your podcast done right. Don't fail all the stuff like I did. But thank you. That has been another episode of the Everyday Game Changers podcast. I'm your host, Barion McQueen, talking to everyday people, changing the game. And Ginni is definitely changing the game out here. We appreciate you and thank you.
Thank you, Barion. So much fun being on the show.
Definitely.